The summer after college was supposed to be simple. 3 months of work. A decent paycheck. Then I'd finally move into my own apartment before starting my full-time job in the fall. Instead, I ended up spending every weekday working for my best friend's father. His name was Cameron. He was 44, divorced for several years, owned a successful custom home renovation company, and somehow managed to make running a crew of 20 people look effortless. Everyone respected him. Clients trusted him. His employees never wanted to disappoint him. And me? I was Bryce, 23 years old, freshly graduated, completely broke, and desperately trying to avoid asking my parents for money one more time. The job happened because of Ethan, my best friend since freshman year of college. "You still looking for work?" he asked one night while we were playing video games online. "Unless you've got a winning lottery ticket, yeah? My dad needs another guy for the summer." I laughed. "I've never held a power tool longer than 5 minutes. You don't need experience. Half the guys start with no clue what they're doing. I'm pretty sure your dad remembers me spilling soda all over his truck." "He remembers. He also remembers you staying until midnight helping him clean it." That sounded more like Cameron than I expected. "I'll ask him," Ethan continued. "Just don't embarrass me. No promises." 2 days later, my phone rang. "Bryce?" "Speaking." "It's Cameron." Even after years of knowing him, hearing his voice made me sit up straighter. "I heard you're looking for work." "Yes, sir." "You don't have to call me sir." "I know, habit." He chuckled. "Can you be at the warehouse Monday morning?" 6:30. 6:30? Construction doesn't wait until lunch. "I'll be there. If you're late, you buy coffee for the whole crew." The call lasted less than 3 minutes. I spent the rest of the evening wondering whether I'd just made a huge mistake. Monday morning arrived much sooner than I wanted. At 6:25 I pulled into the company lot, already clutching a large coffee because I wasn't taking any chances. Several pickup trucks were parked outside the warehouse. Guys in work boots moved stacks of lumber while joking with each other. Then I spotted Cameron. He was studying blueprints spread across the hood of his truck. Dark jeans. Gray company t-shirt. Work gloves hanging from his back pocket. He looked exactly the way I remembered, except somehow younger than I expected. Maybe it was because I'd only ever seen him at Ethan's birthday parties or family barbecues. There, he was just my friend's dad. Here, he looked completely different. Confident. Focused. Completely in control. He glanced up as I approached. "You're early. I figured that was safer." He smiled. "Good instinct." He shook my hand firmly. "No special treatment because you know my son." "I wasn't expecting any." "Good. Because you'll get less." I laughed. "I believe you." Several crew members walked over. "This is Bryce," Cameron said. "He's with us through the summer." One of the older workers grinned. "So you're Ethan's roommate from college?" "Best friend." "Close enough." Another guy looked me over. "You ever swung a hammer?" "Once." "How'd it go?" "I hit my thumb." The whole group laughed. "Honest answer," someone said. "We can work with honest." Within 15 minutes I had a hard hat, safety glasses, and instructions that came faster than I could process them. By 8 o'clock I was sweaty. By 10 my shoulders hurt. By lunch I had discovered muscles I didn't know existed. Cameron noticed me stretching while everyone ate sandwiches in the shade. "First day? Is it that obvious?" "You've got that expression." "What expression?" "I made terrible life choices." I laughed despite myself. "Pretty accurate." "It gets easier." "You promise?" "No." He took a sip of his coffee before adding with a small smile. "But you'll get stronger." That became the rhythm of the first week. Work. Learn. Make mistakes. Learn again. Cameron wasn't the loudest boss. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't have to. If he gave you instructions, you wanted to get them right. Not because you were afraid of him. because disappointing him somehow felt worse. By Friday afternoon, I'd accidentally measured one piece of trim wrong. I expected him to be annoyed. Instead, he walked over, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and handed me another board. "What happened?" I rushed. "Why? I wanted to keep up." He nodded. "Speed comes later." He tapped the fresh board. "Do it again." That was it. No lecture. No embarrassment. Just another chance. As I worked, I caught him watching from across the room for a brief second before he turned back to another employee. For some reason, I found myself wanting him to see that I'd gotten it right this time. That feeling surprised me more than anything else. Because Cameron wasn't just my best friend's dad anymore. He was becoming someone whose opinion mattered far more than I expected. The second week started a lot differently than the first. I stopped feeling like I was just trying to survive every workday. I actually started learning. I could carry materials without looking completely lost. I knew where every tool belonged in the truck. I stopped asking which screws were which every 10 minutes. The crew noticed. "So the college kid finally figured out which end of the hammer to hold," Mike joked one morning. "Barely. Barely counts." Cameron overheard the conversation while loading plywood. "He's improving." 3 simple words. I don't know why they stayed with me for the rest of the day, but they did. Maybe because compliments from Cameron weren't handed out casually. If he said you'd done well, he meant it. That evening Ethan called me. "So? Dad fired you yet?" "Not yet. He likes you." "I don't think likes is the right word." Ethan laughed. "My dad doesn't waste compliments. If he hasn't yelled at you, you're doing great." "That's comforting." "I'm serious." After we hung up, I caught myself smiling. For some reason, hearing that made Cameron's quiet approval mean even more. The following Tuesday, the temperature climbed past 90. By noon, everyone looked exhausted. Sweat soaked through our shirts, and every movement felt twice as difficult. We finally broke for lunch under the shade of a massive oak tree beside the property. Most of the crew immediately started complaining about the heat. "I swear it's getting worse every year. We're gonna melt before August." "I already melted." Cameron opened a cooler in the back of his truck. "I bought extra water." Nobody even tried pretending they weren't grateful. He started tossing bottles around like a baseball pitcher. One landed perfectly in my hands. "Thanks. You've barely had anything to drink today." I blinked. "You noticed?" "I notice everyone." There wasn't anything dramatic about the way he said it. It was simply true. He paid attention. Not just to deadlines or measurements. To people. Half an hour later, I realized he had been right. I was getting dizzy. When he walked past, he stopped immediately. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "No, you're stubborn." "I'm Bryce." Just hearing my name in that calm voice made me stop arguing. 5 minutes later, he handed me another bottle of water. "You don't prove anything by passing out." "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking about it." That actually made me laugh. He smiled. "There you go." It was only a tiny moment. But after that, I found myself noticing how often Cameron quietly looked after everyone. One employee forgot lunch. Cameron shared his. Someone's daughter graduated. He left work early so the guy wouldn't miss the ceremony. A younger worker admitted he couldn't afford new boots yet. The next morning there was an unopened pair waiting in the warehouse. Nobody talked about those things. They just happened. And Cameron never acted like they deserved attention. Friday afternoon we finished earlier than expected. The crew began loading equipment back into the trailers. I was wrestling with an extension ladder that apparently hated me. "You've got it upside down." I looked over. Cameron was trying not to laugh. "I knew that." "You absolutely didn't." "I was testing you." "Terrible recovery." He walked over. Without taking the ladder from me, he showed me the correct angle. "Like this." "Oh. Better?" "Much." He stepped back. "Now try." This time I managed it. There you go. I officially know one more thing than yesterday. That's the goal. As we finished loading the truck, he leaned against the tailgate. You free tomorrow? I looked up. Depends. I've got a smaller project at my house. You don't have to work. I know. But if you want a few extra hours. Extra money sounded amazing. What kind of project? Building shelves in the garage. I can do shelves. He raised an eyebrow. Can you? I'll help build shelves. That's more honest. I grinned. What time? 9. Saturday morning felt strange. For the first time, I wasn't meeting Cameron at a job site. I was driving to his house. I'd been there dozens of times over the years. Birthday parties. Cookouts. Watching football with Ethan. But it felt different pulling into the driveway alone. Cameron opened the garage before I even got out of the truck. Morning. Morning. He handed me another cup of coffee. I remembered you always drink it black. I stared at him. You remembered that? You've been coming here for years. I hadn't expected him to remember something so small. Apparently he had. The garage was mostly empty except for stacks of lumber and boxes pushed against one wall. So what's the plan? He spread out a sketch he'd drawn by hand. We're building storage here. The design looked surprisingly detailed. You drew this? I always draw first. You could have bought shelves. I could. But making them is more fun. That made me smile. I think we're going to get along. I figured. For the next several hours we worked side by side. Without the noise of an entire construction crew, conversation came easier. He asked about college. About my plans after graduation. About where I wanted to live. I've got interviews lined up. For engineering? I nodded. If one works out, I'll probably move downtown. You'll like it. You think? I think you'll finally stop driving that car. I looked offended. My car has character. It has rust. Rust is character. He laughed. You sound exactly like Ethan. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Around lunchtime we sat on the back patio eating sandwiches he'd picked up that morning. The yard was quiet. No coworkers. No deadlines. Just birds somewhere in the trees. After a few minutes Cameron looked over. You've changed. I frowned. Hopefully in a good way. You've grown up. Something about hearing that from him made me unexpectedly nervous. You always seemed responsible, he continued. But now. He searched for the right words. You seem confident. I looked down at my sandwich. I'm still figuring things out. Everybody is. Even you? He laughed. Especially me. I wasn't expecting that answer. You always seem like you've got everything under control. That's because I'm the boss. So it's fake? No. He smiled. But confidence doesn't mean having every answer. For a moment we simply sat there. The conversation felt different. Less like a boss talking to an employee. More like two adults having lunch. I realized something then. Growing up, Cameron had always seemed impossibly older. Someone from a completely different stage of life. Now, sitting across from him, I still respected him just as much. But for the first time, it felt like he was talking to me as an equal. And I wasn't sure when that change had happened. Only that I noticed it now. By the time June was halfway over, I wasn't the new guy anymore. I was still the least experienced person on the crew, but now people trusted me to work without someone watching over my shoulder every 5 minutes. Mike even stopped calling me college kid. Now I was just Bryce. It felt like I'd earned that. Every morning followed the same routine. I'd pull into the warehouse just before 6:30. Someone would already have the radio playing. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sawdust. The guys joked while loading trucks. And Cameron was always there first. Always. I honestly didn't know when he slept. One morning I arrived unusually early after waking up before my alarm. The parking lot was almost empty. Only Cameron's truck sat outside. I walked into the warehouse expecting to wait. Instead, I found him sitting alone at a folding table with blueprints spread everywhere and a coffee growing cold beside him. He looked up. "You're early." "So are you." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I've been here an hour." "Seriously?" "Quiet's easier before everyone gets here." I walked over. "I didn't know you designed all the projects yourself." "Not all." He slid one blueprint toward me. "But most of them." I looked over the drawings. Every measurement was handwritten. Every note was incredibly neat. "I would have guessed these came from an architect. They get cleaned up later." "You draw all this first?" He nodded. "I like understanding a project before anyone swings a hammer." I shook my head. "I don't know how your brain works." "Neither do I half the time." That made me laugh. For a few minutes we just talked. Not about work. About music. About the coffee shop near the warehouse. About how Ethan still somehow forgot his birthday every year until the last minute. "You've known him a long time," Cameron said. "Since freshman orientation. He always says you're the brother he chose." I looked at him. "He actually says that?" "More than you'd think." Something about hearing those words from Cameron hit differently than if Ethan had said them himself. Before I could answer, the warehouse door rolled open. The crew started arriving. Just like that, Cameron was back in boss mode. "Morning, everyone." The conversation disappeared as quickly as it had started. But I found myself thinking about it all day. A few days later, we were remodeling an older farmhouse nearly 40 minutes outside town. The owners were away for the week, so the house was unusually quiet. Around lunchtime, a thunderstorm rolled in without warning. Rain hammered the roof so loudly that nobody could hear each other. "We're not getting back on that roof today," Mike shouted. "No chance," Cameron agreed. "So clean up inside." With the outside work impossible, everyone spread through the house organizing tools and materials. I ended up in the kitchen with Cameron, sorting cabinet hardware into labeled containers. For almost 20 minutes we worked in comfortable silence. The rain kept pouring. Finally he asked, "So how are those interviews going?" "I've got another one next month." "You excited?" "I think I'm more nervous." "Good." I looked over. "Good? It means you care." I laughed. "I was hoping for something more encouraging." "Being nervous keeps you sharp." "You always this optimistic?" "No." He smiled. "I've just failed enough interviews to know." I blinked. "You?" "Oh, plenty." "I can't picture that." "You think I woke up one morning knowing how to run a business?" "I guess not. I was 23 when I started." That surprised me. "I thought you'd always owned the company." "I spent years making mistakes before anyone trusted me." "You don't really look like someone who makes mistakes." He looked at me for a long second before chuckling. "Bryce." "What?" "I make mistakes every week." "You hide them well." "I fix them." That answer stayed with me. Not because it sounded impressive. Because it sounded honest. The storm lasted longer than expected. By 3 in the afternoon the power went out. The house became strangely dark despite the daylight outside. Mike groaned. "Guess we're done." Cameron looked around. "Everyone pack up." Within 15 minutes everything was loaded. As I climbed into my truck, Cameron walked over. "You heading straight home?" "Yeah." "Follow me." "Why?" "There's a diner about 10 minutes from here." I hesitated. "The whole crew?" "No." He looked toward the others. "They're going another direction." "Oh. If you've got time." For a split second I wondered if I'd heard him correctly. Then I nodded. "I've got time." The diner looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Vinyl booths. Old country songs playing quietly. The waitress greeted Cameron by name. "The usual?" "You know me too well." She smiled. "And your friend?" "Friend." The word caught me off guard. "I'll have whatever doesn't require me to cook later." She laughed. I can do that. When she walked away, I looked at Cameron. You come here often? Whenever we're working nearby. You know everybody. I've been around a while. That's your way of saying you're old? He gave me a look. I'm trying to be nice. You failed. We both laughed. The conversation drifted naturally. He asked about my parents. I asked how he'd gotten into construction. My father built houses. So you followed him? For a while. And then? I wanted to do things differently. What happened? He looked out the window at the rain for a moment. We argued. A lot. I'm guessing you won. He smiled faintly. I don't think anyone won. There was something in his voice that made me decide not to ask more. Instead, I asked something else. Do you ever regret it? The business? He shook his head. No. The long hours? He smiled. Sometimes. The paperwork? Every day. I laughed. But not the people. He looked toward the window again. The people are the reason I stayed. I realized then that he wasn't talking only about employees. He genuinely cared about everyone whose life crossed his. The waitress returned with our food. As we ate, she looked between us. So? Cameron raised an eyebrow. What? I haven't seen you bring someone here in a long time. I nearly choked on my drink. Cameron answered before I could. Bryce works with me. I figured. She smiled knowingly before walking away. I stared down at my fries, trying not to laugh. Cameron rubbed the back of his neck. She's curious. I noticed. I've known her 20 years. So this is your fault. It probably is. We both laughed again. For the rest of lunch, something felt different. Not romantic. Not awkward. Just easier. Conversation came naturally now. Silences weren't uncomfortable anymore. When we finally walked back outside, the rain had almost stopped. As we stood beside our trucks, Cameron looked at me. Thanks for coming. I should be thanking you. For lunch? For treating me like more than just another summer employee. He looked genuinely surprised. I never thought of you that way. Those words stayed with me all the drive home. Because they sounded completely sincere. And somewhere between the job sites, the coffee before sunrise, and a quiet lunch in an old roadside diner, I realized I had started looking forward to every morning for a reason that had nothing to do with the paycheck. By the beginning of July, the routine had become my favorite part of the day. Not because construction had suddenly become easy. It hadn't. My hands were rougher than they'd ever been. Every evening I came home sore, usually covered in sawdust, and I had a permanent tan line where my safety glasses rested on my face. But every morning I knew exactly what to expect. Coffee. The crew joking with each other. And Cameron standing beside the trucks with the day's plans already organized. It was strange how quickly someone could become part of your daily life. One Monday, Ethan drove into town unexpectedly. He texted me around lunchtime. Still alive? Barely. Dad says you're actually useful now. I laughed. That evening Ethan stopped by the warehouse just as we were finishing for the day. The crew greeted him like family. Which, in a way, he was. He immediately walked over to Cameron. So, did Bryce survive? Cameron looked at me before answering. He complains less now. I take that as a compliment. You should. Ethan grinned. I told you he'd grow on you. Cameron didn't answer right away. Instead, he finished locking one of the trailers. Finally, he said quietly, he works hard. Just 4 words. But hearing them in front of someone else somehow meant even more. Ethan looked at me with an exaggerated smile. See? I tried to act casual. Inside, I was ridiculously pleased. The next project took us to a lakeside property about an hour outside the city. The owners wanted a complete renovation before the end of summer. It meant longer days. Sometimes we stayed until nearly 7. One evening everyone packed up while the sun was beginning to set over the water. The view was incredible. Mike climbed into his truck. See you tomorrow? One by one the others left. I was loading the last toolbox when Cameron walked over. You hungry? I laughed. I feel like that's becoming your favorite question. Is that a yes? I guess. There's a barbecue place on the way back. 20 minutes later we were sitting outside at a picnic table overlooking the lake. Neither of us was in any hurry to leave. For a while we watched boats crossing the water. You ever think about slowing down? I asked. Cameron smiled. Every January. What happens? By February I've started 3 new projects. So you're terrible at relaxing. I'm aware. What do you do when you're not working? He looked genuinely thoughtful. I used to coach Ethan's baseball team. I remember that. I miss it. You never coached us. You never played. Good point. He smiled. What about you? What about me? What do you do when you're not thinking about work? I realized I didn't have a great answer. I don't know. You should. I've been so focused on graduating and finding a job that I never really thought past that. He nodded slowly. It's easy to let work become your whole life. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. There was something reflective in his voice. Not regret exactly. Just honesty. I spent years believing every extra hour at work meant a better future. And eventually Ethan asked why I was always missing dinner. I looked at him. What did you say? The truth. Which was? I didn't realize I was. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It felt personal. Like he wasn't talking to one of his employees anymore. He was simply talking to me. A few days later I made the biggest mistake I'd made all summer. I misread a measurement. The mistake wasn't dangerous. But fixing it meant several hours of extra work. I expected Cameron to be frustrated. Instead, he asked everyone else to keep working before walking over to me. You know what happened? Yeah. What? I stopped checking my measurements. He nodded. Anything else? I assumed instead of confirming. Exactly. I looked down. I'm sorry. I know. I waited for the lecture. It never came. Instead, he handed me a tape measure. Show me where you caught the mistake. For the next 15 minutes we went through everything together. Not once did he sound annoyed. When we finished, he smiled. You won't make that one again. No. Good. As we walked back toward the others, I finally asked, why aren't you mad? He looked genuinely confused. Would that help? I guess not. You already know what happened. I do. So yelling would just waste time. I couldn't help smiling. You know. What? I think that's why everyone respects you. He laughed softly. You should ask Mike. Why? He'll tell you I'm impossible. I'm starting to think that's not true. He looked at me for a second longer than usual. I appreciate that. Friday evening arrived with another surprise. As everyone climbed into their trucks, Cameron called my name. Bryce. Yeah? You busy Sunday? I don't think so. Ethan's coming over. I smiled. Finally. He wanted to grill. Sounds good. Cameron hesitated. You should come. The invitation felt so natural that I almost answered immediately. Then I realized something. This wasn't a company event. It wasn't work. He was inviting me to spend time with them. I don't want to interrupt family time. You won't. You sure? He smiled. Bryce. Yeah? You're practically family already. For a moment I didn't know what to say. Not because the words carried any hidden meaning, but because they were sincere. I had spent the last months slowly becoming part of their everyday lives without even realizing it. As I drove home that evening, I caught myself smiling at every red light. The summer had started as a temporary job. Now, somewhere along the way, it had become something much harder to define. And although I still refused to admit it to myself, I was beginning to notice that the person I looked forward to seeing every morning wasn't just my boss anymore. Sunday felt different from the moment I pulled into Cameron's driveway. Usually I only came here because of Ethan. Birthday parties, football games, the occasional barbecue. This time Ethan wasn't even there yet. Cameron's truck was already parked outside, the garage door open. He looked up from the grill as I walked around the side of the house. "You made it," I said I would. "I know." He handed me a bottle of water before I even had a chance to ask for one. "It'll be another hot day. You always think of everything, don't you?" "I try." The backyard looked exactly the way I remembered. The same wooden deck. The same old maple tree providing shade. The same lake visible through the trees at the edge of the property. Only now, standing there as an adult instead of a college kid tagging along with his best friend, everything somehow looked different. "Need help?" I asked. "You know how to chop vegetables? I managed to graduate college. I'm asking about vegetables. I'll figure it out." He laughed. "Kitchen." For the next half hour we worked side by side without rushing. He handled the grill while I prepared everything else. The silence never felt awkward. Every now and then one of us would make a joke. Or ask a random question. "So," Cameron said while turning the burgers, "when's your next interview?" "Next Thursday." "Nervous?" "A little." "You'll do fine. You haven't even heard the questions. I've watched you learn an entirely new job in a month." He shrugged. "I like your odds." For some reason, hearing him say that eased my nerves more than anything my parents had said all week. A car pulled into the driveway. "That's Ethan." A minute later my best friend walked through the side gate carrying 2 grocery bags. "They are my favorite people." He hugged his dad first, then clapped me on the shoulder. "I leave town for a month and suddenly you two spend more time together than we do." Cameron didn't even look up from the grill. "You should visit more." I walked right into that. The afternoon passed easily. The 3 of us ate outside, joked about old college stories, and spent nearly an hour arguing over which movies deserved sequels. It felt normal. Comfortable. At one point Ethan disappeared inside to answer a phone call. That left Cameron and me alone on the deck. He looked toward the house before speaking. "He's happier lately." "Ethan?" He nodded. "He likes knowing you're around. I've missed him." "I know." He smiled. "He worries about people. He gets that from you." Cameron looked genuinely surprised. "You think so?" "I know so." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out across the lake. "I hope that's true." A week later, everything changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. We were finishing work when Cameron received a phone call. His expression shifted almost instantly. Concern. "Slow down," he said quietly into the phone. "No, it's okay. I'll be there." He ended the call and turned toward the crew. "I've got to leave." Mike nodded. "We'll finish loading." Cameron looked at me. "Bryce." "Yeah? Can you lock up after everyone's done?" "Of course. I appreciate it." He was already walking toward his truck. I didn't ask questions. Whatever had happened clearly mattered. The next morning he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. "Coffee in hand?" "Everything okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. He gave me a tired smile. "My mother's been in the hospital." I blinked. I didn't know. I don't usually talk about family stuff at work. "Is she all right?" "She will be." He sounded hopeful. "But she's getting older." "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Thanks." The conversation ended there. But throughout the day I noticed something unusual. For the first time since I'd met him, Cameron looked distracted. He measured the same board twice. Forgot where he'd left his pencil. Even Mike quietly asked me if everything was all right. That afternoon, while everyone else packed up, I walked over. "You heading to the hospital?" He looked surprised. "Yeah. Have you eaten?" He hesitated. "I'll grab something." "When?" He smiled faintly. You're starting to sound like me. I've learned from the best. For the first time all day, he laughed. I suppose I deserve that. I reached into my lunch cooler. I've still got half my sandwich. You don't have to. I know. He looked at the container for a moment before accepting it. Thank you? There was something different in the way he said it. Not polite. Personal. Like accepting help wasn't something he did very often. The following days settled into a quieter rhythm. Cameron split his time between work and the hospital. He still showed up every morning. Still organized every project. Still made sure everyone else had what they needed. But he looked tired. One evening, after everyone else had already left, I found him sitting alone on the tailgate of his truck. He wasn't looking at his phone. Wasn't reviewing plans. Just sitting there. You all right? He looked up. I will be. I sat beside him without saying anything. For a minute neither of us spoke. Finally he sighed. It's strange. What is? My whole life she's been the one taking care of everyone. And now? Now she won't let anyone see that she needs help. I nodded slowly. My dad was like that after his surgery. What changed? We stopped asking if he needed anything. Cameron looked over. What did you do? We just showed up. A small smile appeared. That sounds familiar. I learned from someone. He understood exactly what I meant. He looked away toward the sunset. You pay attention. I've had a good teacher. The compliment seemed to catch him off guard. After a long pause, he said quietly, You know Bryce. Yeah? I'm really glad you took this job. I looked at him. So am I. Neither of us said anything after that. We didn't need to. For the first time all summer, it wasn't just respect I felt when I looked at Cameron. It was something warmer. Something I wasn't ready to name. And judging by the thoughtful look on his face as we watched the sun disappear behind the trees, I wasn't the only one beginning to notice that something between us was changing. The following week felt different. Nothing had actually changed. The crew still met before sunrise. The projects still had deadlines. The truck still smelled like coffee and fresh cut lumber. But something between Cameron and me had shifted after that evening on the tailgate. It wasn't obvious. If anyone had watched us, they wouldn't have noticed a thing. He was still my boss. I was still the summer employee. Yet somehow our conversations had become easier. Longer. More personal. One morning I arrived to find him already unloading materials by himself. Where is everyone? Running late. You started without them? I get impatient. I grabbed the other end of a stack of boards. You know, most bosses would wait. I'm not most bosses. I've noticed. He smiled. So have I. We carried the lumber inside together. When we finished, he looked at his watch. We've got 10 minutes. Enough time for coffee? I was hoping you'd say that. There was a small cafe across the street from the warehouse. Usually everyone grabbed coffee separately. This time it was just the two of us. The girl behind the counter recognized Cameron immediately. The usual? You make me predictable. She laughed. Only because you order the same thing every week. She turned toward me. And for you? Before I answered, Cameron spoke. Black coffee. She looked between us. You already know? He always drinks it black. I looked at him. You remembered? He shrugged. I pay attention. The words echoed in my mind all morning. I pay attention. I'd heard him say something similar weeks ago about the crew. Back then it sounded like part of being a good boss. Now, it felt different. Because it wasn't just work anymore. He remembered little things. The way I took my coffee. My interview date. The name of my favorite band. Even that I'd once mentioned wanting to visit Oregon after graduation. None of those things mattered to construction. Yet somehow he'd remembered every one of them. Thursday finally arrived. The day of my engineering interview. I had taken the day off. Around 8 that morning my phone buzzed. Good luck today. Cameron. That was it. One sentence. Nothing dramatic. But somehow it steadied my nerves more than the dozen messages from friends and family. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours. When I walked back to my car, exhausted but hopeful, my phone buzzed again. How'd it go? I smiled. I think pretty well. A few seconds later came the reply. I never doubted you. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. The next morning, everyone wanted to know how the interview had gone. Mike asked first. You get the job? Too early to know. You looked nervous yesterday. I was. Cameron walked past carrying a toolbox. He did fine. Mike laughed. You're more confident than he is. I've seen him work. He said it so naturally that nobody thought anything of it. Except me. Because I knew he wasn't talking about construction anymore. That afternoon we finished earlier than expected. Most of the crew headed home. I stayed behind helping organize the warehouse. As I stacked boxes onto a shelf, Cameron climbed the ladder beside me. You don't have to stay. I know. Then why are you? I shrugged. It'll be faster. He looked at me for a moment. You're terrible at leaving work behind. I laughed. I learned from somebody. He sighed dramatically. I suppose I walked into that. You definitely did. We finished cleaning in comfortable silence. As we locked the warehouse, Cameron leaned against the truck. You got plans tonight? Not really. Ethan's busy? He drove back to campus. Cameron nodded. I was thinking about grabbing dinner. I looked at him. You asking me? If you're free. There it was again. Another invitation that had nothing to do with work. I'd like that. This time neither of us pretended it was just convenient. Dinner was quieter than the last time. Not awkward. Just thoughtful. We talked about everything except construction. Books. Travel. Movies. His favorite fishing spot. The terrible apartment I'd rented during college. At one point I asked, when was the last time you took a vacation? He laughed. A real one? Yeah. He thought for a moment. I honestly can't remember. That's awful. I know. You should go somewhere. With who? The question slipped out before I had time to think. You've got friends. I do. Ethan. He has his own life. I nodded. Then I realized something. For someone surrounded by people every day, Cameron seemed surprisingly alone. He must have noticed the expression on my face. What? I was just thinking. Dangerous. I've never really asked. Asked what? What happened after the divorce? He looked down at his glass. For a moment I thought I'd crossed a line. Then he answered quietly. We grew into different people. No big fight? No. No betrayal. Nothing dramatic. He smiled sadly. Sometimes people simply stop walking in the same direction. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But it still changed everything. He nodded once. It did. For a while either of us spoke. Finally he looked up. I don't usually tell people that. I'm glad you told me. So am I. His eyes met mine. There was something in that moment neither of us acknowledged. Not because it wasn't there. Because acknowledging it would have changed everything. When dinner ended, we walked toward our cars. Neither of us seemed eager to leave. Thanks, Cameron said. For dinner? For listening. I smiled. Anytime. He held my gaze for another second before opening his truck door. As I drove home, one thought refused to leave my mind. This wasn't just admiration anymore. Somewhere between early mornings, shared coffees, and quiet conversations, I had started falling for my best friend's father. And for the first time all summer, I was beginning to wonder if he was fighting the exact same realization. The next few days became an exercise in pretending. Pretending nothing had changed. Pretending I wasn't looking for Cameron every morning the second I pulled into the lot. Pretending dinner the other night had just been dinner. The hardest part was that Cameron seemed to be doing exactly the same thing. He was still professional, still calm, still the same boss everyone respected. But every now and then I'd catch him looking at me for just a second too long before turning back to whatever he was doing. It happened often enough that I started wondering if I was imagining it. Then Friday arrived. We were finishing a deck renovation for an older couple who had spent most of the day bringing everyone lemonade and homemade cookies. By 4 o'clock we were packing the trucks. I carried the last toolbox toward the trailer when Cameron stopped me. "Bryce." "Yeah? You got a minute?" "Sure." He waited until the rest of the crew had drifted toward their trucks. "I heard back about your interview." I frowned. "You what?" "The company called." "They called you?" "They asked for a reference." I blinked. "I didn't even know they were going to." "You listed the company." "I listed the company." He smiled. "They asked what kind of employee you were." "What did you tell them?" "The truth." "And that was?" He looked me straight in the eyes. "I told them if they hired you, they'd wonder how they ever managed without you." For a second I couldn't speak. "You really said that?" "I did." "You barely knew me 2 months ago." "I know you now." There was something about the certainty in his voice that made my chest tighten. "Thank you. You earned it." No one had ever said those words quite like that before. That evening Ethan called again. So, Dad accidentally told me about your interview." I laughed. "Accidentally?" "He doesn't accidentally mention much." "What did he say?" "That you'd probably be leaving him soon." Something about the way Ethan said it caught my attention. And he sounded disappointed." I looked out the apartment window. "He'll find someone else." "That's not what I meant." There was a brief silence. "You know," Ethan continued, "Dad doesn't usually get attached to people. I'm not sure attached is the right word. You'd be surprised." Before I could ask what he meant, Ethan changed the subject. But his words stayed with me. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Mike walked into the warehouse grinning. "Bryce." "What?" "Check your phone." I pulled it out. There was an email. My heart immediately started racing. "Congratulations." I stopped reading halfway through and looked up. "I got it." Mike slapped me on the shoulder. "I knew it." The rest of the crew gathered around. Everyone congratulated me. For a moment I forgot to look for Cameron. When I finally did, he was standing near the office door, watching the conversation with a quiet smile. Once everyone went back to loading trucks, he walked over. "So?" I held up my phone. "They offered me the position. I figured they would. I start in September." He nodded. "Congratulations, Bryce." "Thanks." Neither of us moved. Instead of feeling excited, I suddenly felt conflicted. He noticed. "What's wrong?" "I should be happy." "But this means the summer's almost over." His smile faded slightly. "Yeah." That single word carried far more weight than it should have. As July slipped into August, we both became aware of something neither of us wanted to say aloud. Every workday was one day closer to the end. Every shared coffee. Every lunch break. Every drive back from a job site. They were all becoming limited. One afternoon we were driving back from a project when Cameron suddenly turned off the main road. "Shortcut?" I asked. "Not exactly." 5 minutes later we stopped at a small overlook above the lake. The trucks below looked tiny. The water reflected the afternoon sun. "It's quiet here," I said. "That's why I come." "When things get busy?" "When I need to think." We leaned against the wooden fence overlooking the water. After several minutes Cameron finally spoke. "I've been trying to figure something out." "What?" "The right thing to do." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He let out a slow breath. "You're Ethan's best friend." "I know." "You work for me." "I know." "And you're starting a new chapter in your life." I nodded. "I know all of that." He looked out across the lake again. I've spent weeks telling myself that's where this conversation should end. My pulse quickened. Cameron. He smiled sadly. I've been telling myself that what I've been feeling is admiration. I stayed silent. Respect. Another pause. That I'd started looking forward to our conversations because you're easy to talk to. He laughed quietly. Then one day I realized I was planning my mornings around whether we'd have coffee together. I couldn't look away. I realized I was disappointed whenever you left for the day. The wind moved softly through the trees. I've been trying very hard to ignore what that means. I swallowed. You don't have to ignore it anymore. He looked at me. Really looked at me. I don't want to make your life complicated. You don't. I don't want Ethan caught in the middle. I don't either. He nodded. I also don't want to take advantage of the fact that I'm your employer. You're not. Not intentionally. He took another slow breath. So I'm asking myself one question. What question? What happens after your last day? For the first time all summer, either of us was hiding behind work. Or timing. Or excuses. I smiled before I even realized I was doing it. My last day is 3 weeks away. I know. Maybe. I paused. Maybe we wait 3 weeks. He studied my face, as though making sure he had heard correctly. And then? I smiled a little wider. Then we stop pretending this is only about construction. For the first time since I'd met him, Cameron laughed with complete relief. Not because everything had suddenly become easy, but because neither of us was carrying the secret alone anymore. The last 3 weeks of summer passed faster than either of us expected. Nothing obvious changed. At work, Cameron remained my boss. I remained one of his employees. The crew never suspected a thing. If anything, we became even more careful. No lingering conversations while everyone was around. No coffee breaks unless someone else joined us. No moments that could be misunderstood. And strangely, that made the quiet moments matter even more. Sometimes we'd exchange nothing more than a look across a room full of people. A small smile. A nod. It was enough. My final Friday arrived with perfect weather. The crew finished early after wrapping up the last inspection on the lakeside house we'd spent weeks renovating. Mike stretched his back dramatically. Well, college kid. I guess this is goodbye. I still have another hour. Doesn't count. He pulled me into a quick hug. You worked hard. Thanks. One by one the rest of the crew shook my hand. Several joked that I should come back if engineering didn't work out. Then Cameron walked over carrying a small cardboard box. Your things. Inside were my safety glasses, work gloves, company hat, and the tape measure I'd used almost every day. I don't think the tape measure belongs to me. It does now. I looked up. Really? You've earned it. I ran my thumb across the scratched metal casing. It wasn't expensive. But somehow it felt like one of the nicest gifts I'd ever received. The warehouse slowly emptied. Eventually it was just the two of us. Exactly as it had been on my first morning. Only now everything felt different. So, I smiled. So, you survived. Barely. He laughed. I never doubted you. I did. I know. There was a long silence. Finally Cameron reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My personal number. I looked at him. You already had my work number. This one's different. I carefully slipped the paper into my wallet. I'll use it. I hope so. The following Monday I woke up at 6:30 out of habit. For the first time in months. I had nowhere to be. No warehouse. No trucks. No coffee before sunrise. The apartment felt strangely quiet. I found myself wondering what the crew was doing. Whether Mike was making terrible jokes. Whether Cameron was already reviewing blueprints. My phone buzzed. Coffee? It was from Cameron. Just one word. I smiled. Where? He sent the name of the small cafe across from the warehouse. 20 minutes later I walked inside. He was already sitting by the window. No work boots. No company shirt. Just jeans and a navy polo. For a second he didn't look like my former boss. He just looked like Cameron. He stood as I approached. You came. You invited me. I wasn't completely sure. I was. He smiled. So, I suppose this isn't a work meeting. I certainly hope not. We both laughed. The conversation came effortlessly. Without schedules or projects between us, it somehow felt even easier. We talked for nearly 2 hours. About my new job. About places we still wanted to travel. About books. Music. Family. Life after 40. Life after college. At one point Cameron leaned back in his chair. You know. What? I've been thinking about Ethan. I have too. I called him yesterday. That caught me off guard. You told him? I wasn't going to let him hear it from someone else. I felt my stomach tighten. What did he say? Cameron smiled. He asked one question. Which was, does Bryce make you happy? I blinked. And? I told him yes. What did he say after that? Cameron laughed. He said. He paused for effect. About time you two figured it out. I stared at him. You're kidding. I wish I were. He knew. He said he'd started wondering weeks ago. I covered my face with one hand. I'm never going to hear the end of this. No. Cameron smiled warmly. I don't think either of us will. That evening Ethan invited both of us over for dinner. Walking into his apartment felt far more intimidating than any interview I'd ever had. Ethan opened the door. He looked from me to his dad. Then he shook his head. You two are exhausting. Hello to you too, Cameron replied. I've been waiting all summer. I looked at him. You really knew? I didn't know. He grinned. But every time I called Dad, somehow your name came up. Cameron sighed. I really did that. Constantly. And every time I talked to Bryce. Ethan looked at me. Your story somehow ended with, Cameron said. Or Cameron thinks. I couldn't even deny it. Ethan laughed. You made this way harder than it needed to be. Dinner turned out to be surprisingly normal. There were jokes. Old stories. Arguments over baseball. At one point Ethan looked around the table and smiled to himself. What? I asked. Nothing. What? He shrugged. It's just nice. What is? Seeing two people I care about smiling this much. No one had anything to add to that. September arrived. I started my engineering job. The hours were different. The work was different. Everything was new. But every Friday evening, Cameron and I found time to meet. Sometimes for dinner. Sometimes just coffee. Sometimes we'd walk around the lake where we'd had our first honest conversation. There was no rush. No need to force anything. The best relationships, I realized, weren't built on dramatic moments. They were built on ordinary days shared with the right person. Months later, I found myself back at the warehouse. Not because I worked there. Just because I wanted to visit. Mike spotted me first. Look who came back! The crew welcomed me like I'd never left. Cameron walked out of the office carrying a set of blueprints. Our eyes met. He smiled. Still the same quiet smile that had made me feel welcome on my first day. Only now I knew what it meant. As we locked up together that evening, he glanced at me. So? Still glad you took the summer job? I laughed. It was the best decision I never planned. He reached for my hand as we walked toward the parking lot. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just quiet certainty. Looking back, people always assumed the story began when I fell in love with my best friend's dad. They're wrong. It started much earlier. It started with a job I almost didn't accept. With early mornings. Shared coffee. Patient conversations. Respect that slowly became friendship. friendship that quietly became love. And sometimes, the best chapters of your life don't begin with a grand moment at all. Sometimes they begin with someone simply saying, "Can you be here Monday morning at 6:30?" I said yes because I needed a summer job. I had no idea I was saying yes to the person who would change my life.